Hello and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing well, man. Excited for the discussion of our latest show, the all-time leading scorers in each NBA franchise history and what they say about your team.
Yeah, and I think another sort of underrated aspect of this, too, is that there are a few, it sort of works, not necessarily as a season preview all in all, but I mean, there are a few teams that we're going to talk about here that could possibly have new, all-time scorers once the season's all said and done. So, kind of interesting in that respect, too. But yeah, it was a fun little exercise to look at because it's not something it's something you sort of take for granted and you kind of maybe assume some guys that you think are probably there. But, it was kind of interesting in doing the discovery here. It's not always the exact person that you maybe thought it was, and it's maybe not the guy that you think of as the franchise definer. Like a lot of times there will be a guy who sort of snuck in there and you're like, oh, I didn't expect that guy to be the all-time leader. But it's pretty funny. We're going to explore at least, what it says about each team, like you said, for their leading scorer being X. What does that mean for the team or whatever? So pretty fun little exercise.
Yeah, and there'll probably be more Sean Kilpatrick than you expected on this episode.
Far more Sean Kilpatrick than I expected.
Yes,
that is
right.
It's pretty good. As much Randy Smith as you expected, though. So
yeah, about as much Randy Smith, absolutely. So. All right. Well, we'll begin with the Atlanta Hawks. In their all-time leading scorer is Dominique Wilkins with 23,292 points, averaging 26.4. And of the 30 players who lead their franchises, he is 6th in points per game and 10th in overall points. I would say he's not the best player in franchise history. That would be Bob Pettit, who's right behind him in all-time points. But I think he's safely second best in franchise history. Would you agree with that?
I think that's definitely safe to say. I mean, I could see somebody making an argument if you want it for Dominique, but I feel like Pettit's probably a little bit higher than him. But at worst, second is basically the way you can kind of put it.
Yeah, and Pettit was an MVP, led them to a championship,
right.
58. So, yeah, Wilkins doesn't have any of that. And I think he's kind of emblematic of what the track the franchise has been on, since the 60s. They've had a lot of good teams in the 60s and the 80s and 90s and even in the 2010s. That 60-win team they had a couple years ago, and a lot of them were really good and might have been at least finals contenders in certain seasons, but they fell short of excellent to the 80s Celtics and to the recent Cavs and the 90s Bulls and some really great teams along the way. So I think he's emblematic of that, of like Wilkins is like an amazing player, but he never really got past the second round of the playoffs despite having some really good teams.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too, some of the names that are on here as well. Like you have Joe Johnson at 6, which that sort of makes sense given the Joe Johnson sort of track, but a guy that surprised me a little bit was number 8, Josh Smith. I did not expect to see Josh Smith at that point, even though obviously he had a very marked career, but I mean, based off how it kind of ended, and it just, I don't know, it just didn't seem like he was in Atlanta that long. But then when you remember that he came out of high school and it's been there 2005 to 2013 or whatever, it is pretty amazing there. So no, he was 2011, right, when he was done with Atlanta, or was it 2013 when he?
It was 2013. Yeah.
Was it 2013? Okay, because he went to the Pistons, of course, with the
right.
That did not work out all that well, but we won't have to talk about that. But no, I was kind of surprised to see him up there, even though because he obviously struggled a few of his early years, but seemed to get it together later. But yeah, for him to be as high as he was a little surprising to me.
Yeah, and also on the list, Lou Hudson was 3rd, Cliff Hagan 4th, John Drew, who we talked about in one of our overlooked players episodes, was 5th, even ahead of Joe Johnson, which surprised me a little bit. Kevin Willis, Fast Eddie Johnson, and Zemo Beatty also being on there as well. And the Hawks have actually 2 players, Wilkins and Pettit, who are over 20,000 points, and there are actually only 23 players who have 20,000 points for a franchise, and half of NBA franchises don't have one. So the Hawks obviously one of the older franchises, one of the original 8 NBA franchises that survived the merger years. So obviously they have a longer amount of time to accumulate that history, but still pretty impressive. A lot of teams don't, even as old as they are, don't quite have that. So the active leader, so we're calling active leader a player who is actually still on the team.
Yeah, currently on that team. You're right.
Yeah. Joe Johnson is technically the active leader, but unlikely he's going to go back to the Hawks. So Dennis Schroeder, who is 45th on the list with 3,244 points, averaging 11.4 points per game. And it's going to be a while before he has a chance to make it, certainly as the leader, if not in the top 10.
Yeah, we're kind of doing a little bit of math here based off, and a lot of times for the rest of the teams that we're going to talk about, based off kind of their last year output or their last, full healthy season or whatever. So it assumes that they're going to kind of continue continue doing what they do. And for the purposes of exercise, it's all we wanted to kind of see is just a big gap between these guys. In terms of Schroeder, a little under 4 years for him to make up the gap to get to the top 10. So I think that's possible if he stays with Atlanta for a while. As far as taking Wilkins' top spot, I do not think that's going to happen because it will take a little over 14 seasons. So basically he would have to keep up his production from last season for another 14 years to take over Dominique Wilkins' top spot. So I don't know if Dennis Schroeder is going to be the all-time leader in the Hawks. But, hey, 14 seasons, that's not unreasonable.
Well, he's young enough, I guess. That would be the only thing.
Right, yeah.
Yes, I don't think he's going to probably be as effective at 37 or 38 as he is
hey, now.
now. But, there are longer shots than Dennis Schroeder, I would have to say, on our list. So next, the Boston Celtics with John Havlicek, who has 26,395 points, averaged 20.8. He is 15th in points per game among the top 30 leaders and 7th in total points. I would say he's not the best player in franchise history, but I would say there's a decent argument he's among the top three behind Bird and Bill Russell. We talked about that in our Big Three episode earlier on here. I think he and Pierce, I think, were the favorites for being the top three, and Pierce and Lair is right behind him in on the scoring list. Larry Bird are right behind them with Pierce's 24,000 points, Bird with 21,000, almost 22,000 points. And I think what Havlicek says about the Celtics franchise, of course, they and he have a lot of rings. And it's, I guess, interesting to note based on the Celtics history that he is the only white American who is a franchise leading scorer among the 30 teams. So I don't know what that says, but it says something.
Yeah, and pretty secure too. I think it's gonna be a while until he's unseated as well, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But yeah, no, it's interesting, and it seems perfect for the Boston Celtics that he is the man atop their list. But there you go.
Yeah, and obviously Russell was great player, one of the best ever, not a great scorer, and Bird was a better player and a better scorer, but didn't play quite as long. So
yeah, longevity definitely hurts Bird a little bit. I mean, obviously he still had a very lengthy career, but yeah, you wonder if 3 or 4 more years he would have been at least in the conversation or right up there with him. But yeah, just a little too much. And the same could really be said for Pierce. If Pierce doesn't get traded to Brooklyn, he probably does take that top spot. But yeah, things are what they are. And, we're going to talk about it a little bit. I think a lot of it is just, longevity and staying on the team. I mean, that's it. It's just that simple of just kind of doing your entire career with that one team will in a lot of ways vault you up these lists.
Yes, and the Celtics have 13 players above 10,000 points, which is the most of any franchise. Parrish, McHale, Kuzi, Sam Jones, Dave Cowens, JoJo White, Bill Sharman, Ty Heinsohn, and Anton Walker all making that list, and 3 of them above 20,000, as we mentioned. Yes, and the active leader, a little bit of a ways to go.
Yeah, it's Marcus Smart. He's 73rd right now. He's got 1916 points. I don't think that's going to happen. 1,916. I don't think it's going to work for him. 9.3 points per game. It's going to take quite a while. Basically, another 13 and a half seasons of his current production, and he'll get into the top 10. So I don't think that's going to happen. And I also do not think Marcus Smart is going to keep up his production that he had last year, given that they've acquired a few other people that like to score the basketball. So yeah, I don't think Marcus Smart anytime soon is going to get either in the top 10 or number 1. But one thing I did find really interesting, though, before we move on to the next team is how many of these players played together in the Celtics. You know what I mean? Like, this is a franchise that had obviously a lengthy history or whatever, but you have, in terms of Kuzi, Jones, Russell, Sharman, Heinsohn, all kind of the same era, same team or whatever. In the 80s, obviously you have Bird, Parrish, McHale, all right in there. You have a few of the 70s guys as well kind of lumped in in terms of Cowens and JoJo White. And then really just the other 2 are Anton Walker and Paul Pierce. But basically, 3 eras of Boston Celtics basketball, very successful Boston Celtics basketball, save for obviously the Pierce Walker era, obviously didn't win the rings, but other than that, you're basically representative of those 3 eras. I mean, obviously it speaks to the fact that those eras did last quite a while, but it also speaks to, just how great those teams were at that point, especially the 50s, 60s teams, which, I mean, they make up almost half this list of guys from that team or whatever. And it speaks as well to how they sort of played their style of play as well, where it was very conducive to a lot of scoring. So it gets kind of a lot of these guys up there.
Yeah, and they were, as we've talked about before, they were really, as the shot clock was instituted and the pace increased, they really took advantage of that with, fast breaking and, Russell's ability to turn defense into offense and all that good stuff. And that's very much, shown in where they rank historically with all their, great team success. And yeah, it really fits the periods in which they had their most success with Pierce kind of bridging, both the years with Anton Walker where they were pretty good. They had that Eastern Conference Finals in 2002, and then of course the Garnett Allen years where Garnett and Allen weren't around long enough and weren't prolific enough scorers at that point in their career to make this list. But Pierce obviously bridging those eras.
Yep.
And next, a team not quite with the same amount of illustrious success.
Speak for yourself.
The Brooklyn Nets, and Brook Lopez, just barely at the end of the season with 4 more points than Buck Williams at 10,444.
Do you remember where you were when this moment happened? I don't, but I was hoping you did.
I was on Twitter when I heard about it, which would have been soon after the moment happened. Of course, Brook Lopez was traded to the Lakers, so he will not be adding to this total now. But he is among the 30 players who lead their franchises, 23rd in points per game, 27th in points total. It's interesting to list where you think Lopez is in franchise history. Certainly not the best player. That would probably be either Jason Kidd or Julius Erving, depending on if you value Kidd's longevity over Irving's. Only played 3 seasons with the Nets, but they won 2 championships in there, and he was undisputably the better peak player. So, but I would say top 5. You can throw Buck Williams in there. Carter or Jefferson as well. I think are a candidate as well. I don't know if there's anybody else really on that list who you're thinking would be among the top 5 in franchise history, which it kind of, I think, says something about their franchise history, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it speaks more to. I mean, this is a team that's been around for 50 years, and like the names on this list are guys that either play just a kind of a cup of coffee with the team, or guys that just don't jump off the page. I mean, I think the harder issue is trying to figure out who that top Nets player of all time was. Like I think you could reasonably, like you said, make a case for Irving, make a case for Kidd, but I mean, otherwise this list you got Brook Lopez, Buck Williams, Vince Carter, Richard Jefferson, and Jason Kidd. So those top 5 are all guys. Obviously Kidd and Jefferson played at the same time. Carter and Kidd played at the same time. He comes a little bit later. Then you have Brook Lopez, who comes at the tail end of the Vince Carter era. So you basically just have that. That's 2002 to the present is basically represented there. And then you have Buck Williams in like the mid 80s. And then the rest of their history is pretty much just out of here. You got, John Williamson in 6th, Julius Erving, as you mentioned, 7th, Kerry Kittles comes up, 8th, Derek Coleman, and Chris Morris. I think it speaks more to just that team, man. It's been around for 50 years and there's just no history, there's not that guy. There's not even, a few guys that you can say there's just a blob of guys that you're like, yeah, I guess, whatever, Irving in 3 years justifiably could be the best player in Nets history, which is nuts.
Yeah, I mean, he's 7th all time on their scoring list, despite only playing there for 3 years. I mean, that's pretty incredible. So, and yeah, I definitely say he or Kidd. You would argue that either of us are the most successful periods came with Kidd and Irving. So, yeah, and the only 3 teams with points leaders that are lower than the Nets, which are the Grizzlies, the Hornets, and the Pelicans, have each existed 25 or fewer years, and as you mentioned, the Nets have existed for 50. So, the active leader at 87th, Sean Kilpatrick, with 1237, averaged 13.3 points per game. So, and it wouldn't even necessarily take that long for him to make it into the top 10.
No, sadly, it would only take him about 6 years at his current output to make it into the top 10. So, again, how is that even possible for a franchise that's been around since 1968? But, yeah, I actually wasn't sure that Sean Kilpatrick was a real person until I looked it up. Because you put him on the list, and I was like, that's not a real person. That's not a real player. But apparently he is. So, yes. Sean Kilpatrick, Brooklyn Nets, 6 more years. So get on the watch. The Sean Kilpatrick watch, because he keeps up that 13.3 points per game for another 6 years. He's top 10. So
yeah, get on the bandwagon.
Look out, Chris Morris.
Watch out. Yeah, exactly. SK's coming after you, baby. All right.
Is that what the kids call him? They call him SK.
What's that?
Is that what the kids call Sean Kilpatrick? SK.
Oh,
okay, that's right.
SK. That's what the kids are calling him. Yeah.
Cool. Those kids absolutely. And their nicknames, they're so many.
They do. They do. They have nicknames. So if I knew his number, I would say SK and his number, but I don't know his number.
Let's
so
call
I'm not
it 12.
Either, so.
Let's say he's 12. Yeah.
Yeah. So next, another team, lower end of the illustrious scale would be the Charlotte Hornets. May have also been known as the Charlotte Bobcats. I don't remember that, but that seems to be Basketball Reference listed that.
I think you got your Sean Kilpatrick's number 6, by the way, in case you're curious. For those,
okay, there
those
you
scoring
go.
at home. As far as your
home.
Bobcats thing, never heard of it, and I don't think... Again, you're making up Sean Kilpatrick, and you're making up this Bobcats thing. I don't know what you're doing here, but...
Yeah, I mean, why would anyone ever name their team the Bobcats?
Yeah,
that would
right.
obviously
like
be
even if your name
ridiculous.
was Bob, it's like that's just pretentious to name it after yourself and like use a cat. It's insane that nobody would ever go through that and like make their colors like purple and blue. And no, it's ridiculous. They would never do that.
Yes. Well, the franchise's leading scorer, Del Curry, with 9,839 points. So no one has made 10,000 points in the franchise's history. Averaged 14 points a game. That he's 30th in points per game and 29th in total points among the 30 players. They have not really, I mean, like the Nets, but even maybe more magnified, they've not really had an all-time great for any sustained period. Alonzo Mourning, I would say the best player who played for them for any amount of time is 11th in total with 4,569 points from 93 and 95. So obviously didn't play that long. The other guys on this list, Kemba Walker, he's second. He's the active leader right now. He's going to probably be the number one player soon, and he's a good player, but nothing, not particularly, not going to be, nowhere near like top 100 or anything like that of all time. Gerald Wallace, who was pretty good. Larry Johnson and Glenn Rice, who were both, very good players, but didn't play there real long. Muggsy Bogues, who's 6th on this list despite having an 8.8 points per game average. Raymond Felton and David Wesley rounding out the field. So not, unfortunately, the Hornets have not had a lot of, not had as much fun as you would have expected here.
No, I was kind of really hoping for Baron Davis to be higher on the list, but he was not. But yeah, as far as
so Baron Davis gets screwed in the New
he
Orleans,
does, right.
Charlotte thing. Yes.
Right.
So
yes.
Which I know people tell us is not confusing, but it's a little confusing sometimes.
Yeah,
I mean, I get it. Like, it's just the Charlotte history. So it's 89 to 2002, and there's like that 3-year gap, and that's 05 to 17.
Right. That makes all the sense in the world.
But, but like he's still like Baron Davis kind of like he's kind of half Hornets and half Pelicans, even though he never played for the He played for the
right. Yeah, people say it's not
Pelicans
confusing unless
Hornets.
you're trying to do like research for something like this, and it's like, well, where do I put what pocket do I put this guy in, or what
right.
whose history does this guy belong to? Like Baron Davis, like to me, he's Hornets, but I can't separate the fact that half of his career is Charlotte Hornets and the other half of his Hornets career is New Orleans, and that belongs to the Pelicans. Like that does for the purposes of this, like you would think Baron Davis, Hornets, Baron Davis. No, it's not, because they went to New Orleans, and so it is confusing, even though people don't say it. But as far as active leader Kemba Walker, as you said, he has a real chance to tie or beat Del Curry this year to take over the top spot. He only needs 1,700, a little over 1,700 points to tie Curry. He had 1,830 last year, so I think there's a pretty good chance, assuming health, pretty likely that he will pass Curry this year for the top spot. So make sure you're looking out for that as well, and watching every single Hornets game with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that Kemba Walker is soon to be the all-time franchise leader. Charlotte franchise, not New Orleans Hornets, but whatever. Okay, yeah, that's Kemba Walker for you.
For what it's worth, if we counted Baron Davis's, if we counted just his
Hornets output,
Charlotte and New Orleans, he would have about 6,000, slightly under 6,000 points.
So he'd be fifth then. He'd be fifth above Glenn Rice.
He would be fifth. Yes, slightly above Glenn Rice. So for what it's worth.
I still love you, Baron.
Yes. Kemba Walker's, he is probably going to be getting into, he is going to be probably number one this season, assuming health. So I think he's a better all-time player than Del Curry. He was, nice three-point shooter and all that. But when your leading scorer is Del Curry, that says something about
it's not great,
success that you've had for your franchise. So, a little more successful, the Chicago Bulls, and leading the way is Michael Jordan with 29,277 points, 31.5 average. That is second most in points per game and fourth most in total points for a franchise. I think it's pretty safe to say he's the best player in franchise history. Not going to have a whole lot of argument there. And I was a little surprised. I guess they had more players with 10,000 points than I actually expected. Of course, Pippen's there. Some of the 70s Bulls guys are there. Chet Walker just under 10,000. Jerry Sloan, Bob Love is there, and Luol Deng actually.
Yeah, I did. I would not have expected Luol Deng to be a 10,000 point scorer for the Bulls, but here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, other than that, I mean, we have Kirk Heinrich played long enough to get 8,500 points. Artis Gilmore with over 9,000, and then Reggie Theus with 8,000, and Derrick Rose just over 8,000 for 10th place. So it's sort of an interesting list. I think the two times in which the Bulls were really, relevant, obviously the Jordan years would be by far the most, but also the early 70s Bulls that we've talked about several times, and they're well represented here as well. And then I guess, the other years of, when Derrick Rose was briefly, a franchise player and was winning MVPs, and the Bulls were, theoretically a conference championship threat if it hadn't have been for, injuries to Derrick Rose.
Yeah, and a few of those years, especially the early Heinrich and early Deng years, was another, sort of semi-competitive team. I mean, a regular playoff team, if anything. So, that was the beginning of sort of the rebuild, or the rises from the muck of the post-Jordan Bulls. And then, it sort of parlayed themselves then into the Derrick Rose era, like you said. And then Deng obviously got a little bit of benefit of both ends of those, both those eras. So, as far as franchise active leaders, well, since after this offseason, it's no longer Jimmy Butler. It is a guy that I would have never, ever in a million years expected to be the active leader for any team's scoring, but it is Nikola Mirotic. He's 47th in their all-time at 2,354. He's got 10.8 points per game right now. He's only 26,923 away from topping Jordan. So if you take his career-high single-season point total, which is rookie year, so yeah, it's depressing, but it was his rookie year, it will only take Mirotic him another 32 seasons to beat out Jordan. So not too bad. Set your watch, set your alarm, 32 years to see what's going on with the Mirotic, check in.
I'm going to set my alarm for 32 years right now. Exactly.
Do it. Yes. Check on it. Did Mirotic break Jordan's record yet?
32 years. Yeah. Now, I think that, with the Bulls this year, he could score more. Like, I feel like he's going to have just a higher role in the offense. So it could be like 29 years, maybe.
Right. Maybe we could slim it down to 28 tops, and he explodes for 30 points a game or something. As far as that, it'll still nearly take him 10 seasons to get into the top 10 as well. So it's going to be quite a while for Mirotic to do that. But I do not think that Michael Jordan needs to worry too much about Nikola Mirotic taking the spot.
Probably not. No. Next, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Number one is LeBron James. Might have heard of him, with 20,868 points for the Cavaliers, and averaging 27.2. He is 5th in points per game and 14th in total points among the 30. Safe to say, again, he is the best player in franchise history. Not a difficult one there. And really, I think this list kind of says that, he's really like they've never really been able to get another player, a secondary player, obviously like on the level of Pippen with Jordan. Obviously, Kyrie Irving has had a good career. He's 8th on this list with 8,232 points. Obviously, not going to be adding more to his Cavs total after that trade. Zydrunas Ilgauskas is number 2 with 10,600. Brad Daugherty 10,300. Austin Carr with 10,200 points, and Mark Price with 9,500. Bingo Smith only 30 points behind him at number 6. Also on the list are Hot Rod Williams, Larry Nance, and Campy Russell. So a nice mix there. Mostly with the other than LeBron, mostly the late 80s, early 90s guys and their other period of strong success. And the fact that other than Z, there are no players who played with LeBron in that first, in that first go around, obviously kind of speaks to what we were talking about before of not really being able to get a good co-star for LeBron.
Right, and it's going to be pretty interesting too if LeBron were to leave the Cavs. It's really you got to go deep. Then I think without looking at it, it's probably a guy like a Kevin Love, right? Like it becomes their active leader. So none of them are above 5,000 right now in terms of current Cavs. So hopefully LeBron stays because they'd be in dire in our next year when we do this exact same podcast. I don't think we are, but if we were to and LeBron leaves, it'll be pretty dire there for the old Cavaliers.
Yeah, not exactly a strong list. Yeah, now I'm curious about who. Oh, it's actually Tristan Thompson.
Tristan has, oh Lord,
yeah, 4,378. He is 20th overall. Kevin Love 25th at 3,604. Yeah, although Tristan is averaging 9.4 points per game and Love is averaging 17 points per game, so he might catch up with him reasonably soon on that. So in a year, it could be Love, depending on how things go there. But yeah, so it is 4 players above 10,000. One of them, of course, above 20,000. So next, kind of a similar boat in terms of all-time, franchise leaders, with one extremely dominant, the Dallas Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki, 30,000 points for his career, 30,260 to be exact, and 21.7 average. That's 13th in points per game and 3rd in points out of the 30. Another guy who's clearly the best player in franchise history. Not really any debate about that. And there are 5 players who had above 10,000, Rolando Blackman, Mark Aguirre, Derek Harper, and Michael Finley. Finley kind of being up that high sort of surprised me. I guess I didn't think of him as being in Dallas for that long. He kind of fell off before the Mavericks were, really a championship contender. I mean, I guess they were kind of a championship contender in the early 2000s, but they actually made a finals. And of course, it was way after that they actually won the championship. So he kind of gets forgotten about there, but he was, every bit as important as Dirk, really in those early 2000s.
Yeah, and he absolutely,
or very close.
Yeah, no, and he absolutely, I mean, if you take a score, I mean, obviously he started in 1997, and pretty much from the get-go, he was their, top scorer, guy that kind of put the ball in his hands. And even through the first few years of Dirk, when Dirk was still kind of trying to find himself a little bit, Finley was the main guy. So, he goes from 1997 to about, 2000-ish as being their top guy, and then then takes a step back. But also the prolific offenses with, Nash, Dirk, and him, of course, under Don Nelson too, certainly helped. I mean, they accumulated a lot of points during that era as well. So it makes a lot of sense that he would be up there. Yeah, for him to be as high is a little surprising, but for him to be in the top 10, I'm not surprised by that at all.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, not for him to be top 10, not surprising, but 12,000 was a little more than I was expecting.
Yeah. Josh Howard being in the top 10 now, that I'm a little surprised, but I know he had obviously a couple good seasons, but yeah, he was in and out. I mean, he's only 6 years in there and he was already in the top 10, which I guess says a little bit about the franchise's health before the Dirk, Finley, Nash era. And it wasn't that good because Josh Howard is already ninth after, 6 seasons.
Yeah, a big list of 80s guys on this list. We mentioned Blackman, Aguirre, Harper, also Brad Davis, who, despite averaging 8.6 points per game, managed to accumulate 7,600 points. And Sam Perkins, the later half of the 80s, and Jay Vincent, 10th on this list with 6,464 points. So all these early to mid 80s guys involved. They obviously had a period of some pretty good years there, including an 88 Western Conference Finals appearance, taking the Lakers 7 games. So yeah, but other than that, not so much. Of course, until the Dirk years. So next we have the Denver Nuggets with Alex English, the leading scorer of the 80s for Denver, 21,645 points, average of 25.9 points per game, 7th among the 30 in points per game, and 12th in points overall. Definitely a candidate for best player in franchise history. I might go with Dan Issel, but you could definitely talk me into that. Even maybe David Thompson if you're just thinking of their absolute peak, because obviously Thompson, with the injuries and drug issues, did not have a particularly long effective career. But when they were at their best, going to the ABA Finals, Thompson was their most important player.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting discussion there between English, Issel, Thomas, or Thompson, and then you could probably put Carmelo in there too. I think he has a reasonable case. But there's a few guys you can make it there. Yeah, I think English is maybe the best one. Yeah, it's really hard. A lot of those guys are pretty close. I don't know that I can definitively come out with the number one right now, but English is definitely in the mix.
Yeah. So I mean, of course, he was the all-time leading scorer of the 80s. I mean, obviously, the Nuggets are well known for being a run and gun type team throughout most of the 90s. So they piled in points maybe faster than a lot of franchise leaders would, but I mean, he was a really 25 points per game throughout the decade. That's pretty prolific. That's up there in NBA history, and he's sort of I don't know, maybe a little bit overlooked for how prolific he really was. But the Nuggets also have those guys are above 10,000 points. Also, Ralph Simpson is there, and rounding out their top 10 are Byron Beck, who was part of the ABA years, Fat Lever, we've talked about in the Triple Doubles episode, Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, who of course was quite a great early 90s scorer, Nene, and Kiki Vandeweghe rounding out the top list. So the active leader, though, has a little ways to go.
Yeah, it's kind of Farid. He's 24th right now at 4,858 for him, 11.9 points per game for him. He's really hard to predict, though, as far as when he'll overtake. I mean, he had 3 or 4 years a few years ago where his scoring was a lot more prolific than it is now. So I don't know, do we extrapolate those numbers or the 587 he had last season? I feel like last season was real bad for him. So I don't know. Let's just, hypothetically, we'll say, if we say 900 per season, which is more than he's done recently, but maybe he figures it out again or, gets back to where he was a few years ago. It doesn't matter because it's going to take him, a little over 2 seasons to get in the top 10 if he goes back to sort of what he was as a scorer. But as far as taking over Alex English, I mean, that seems pretty impossible. It'll take 18 seasons at Farid's, career best to top Alex English. And it's pretty good chance his career best is done and he's sort of in a regression period now. So, yeah, I don't think kind of Farid. I think maybe an outside chance that he gets to top 10. Absolutely zero chance in the world that he gets to number 1.
Yeah, and also he's behind Paul Millsap now, so that seems less likely that he's going to have a bigger role, or maybe a little bit, but yeah. Possible for top 10. Kiki Vandeweghe was a really great scorer, but only played for the Nuggets for 4 seasons before moving on to Portland, but averaged 23.3 points per game there. So, next, the Detroit Pistons, who the leader is Isaiah Thomas, who had 18,822 points, averaging 19.2 points per game, 21st on the list in points per game, 17th in points. A lot of people would make the case that he is the best player in franchise history. There's some debate level there. I think he's definitely the best player on their best teams, but as we talked about before, some of the numbers don't really love what he contributed, but a lot of the the more the eye test approach or more of the who was really the leader of those teams kind of favor him, and we've always kind of taken sort of an in between position on that, I think. The Pistons actually, of course, being one of the older franchises, actually do have a lot of players with more than 10,000 points. And next on the list is Joe Dumars, Bob Lanier, Dave Bing, Bill Laimbeer, Rip Hamilton, Vinnie Johnson, and Tayshaun Prince, just barely over 10,000 points in his career as a Piston, which honestly very much surprised me. I know he played there for a long time. He had like an 8 or 9 year stint, and then he popped back in 2015 with a brief return to the team, but that one kind of surprised me.
Active leader's a little surprising as well, but I guess not, but I guess says a little bit about where the Pistons are right now. But the active leader at 31 is Andre Drummond at 5,120 points, 13.3 points per game. As far as when he'll be in the top 10, in about 3 or 4 more years for him at this current scoring pace, I'll get him in the top 10. As far as the top spot, though, I think it's going to be pretty tough. It's going to be about 10 and a half more seasons until he does that. And it seems difficult to extrapolate, current Andre Drummond in the NBA in 10 and a half years. Who knows? But yeah, it would take a little I'd say a little bit of a miracle for him to be the top, or him wanting to stay in Detroit for as long as he is. And given how his career's gone to Detroit, I don't know that that's going to happen either. So we'll see how Andre Drummond goes. But it's gonna be a while until he's either in the top 10 and very long until he's the number 1.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty young, so, I mean, if they decide, if it works out, they could keep him. He could rise up those rankings, and you'd definitely be in the top 10, but, obviously, that would be a long time, and a lot of things would have to happen for him to get there. Rounding out the top 10, I forgot to mention Grant Hill, just under 10,000, 9,393 points, and then John Long, sort of a forgotten name, was rounding out this list at number 10. He played sort of an interesting 2 eras was in the Pistons from 79 to 91. I think there was a gap there, and he came back, but it's interesting he goes pretty far back in terms of a completely different era of Pistons basketball, and then I don't know if he actually played on the championship team, but was there kind of for the end of that Bad Boys run. So anyway, next is a very interesting franchise to think about is the Golden State Warriors, and their leading scorer in franchise history is Wilt Chamberlain with 17,783 and 41.5 points per game. He is first in points per game, not surprisingly, 20th in points, and he only played there for, I believe, 4.5 or 5.5 seasons. So, it was obviously playing in an era in which he could, accumulate massive points total, and he was, of course, an awesome scorer, scoring 50 points per game one season. And he is just barely ahead of several players above 16,000 points. Rick Barry, Paul Arizin, and Chris Mullin, all kind of representing different eras of Warriors basketball, including the championship years with Barry, and in 75, a mid-50s championship with Paul Arizin and Mullin, with a good run TMC and those, some interesting teams there. Then followed by Nate Thurmond and Steph Curry, who we'll get more to in a second, with just over 13,000 points. Jeff Mullins, Purvis Short, and Neil Johnson, all over 10,000 points, and just barely Joe barely behind 10,000 points with 9,000.
If he just cared 4 points more, he would have been there.
10th on this list. A little bit, yeah, exactly. So, so they have, of course, again, another team that's been around a long time, but they have 9 above 10,000 for the franchise. Anything else? Anyone on there stand out to you other than, of course, Stephen
No, I was,
Curry?
Not seeing Klay Thompson up there quite yet, but I feel like not looking at the numbers, I feel like he's probably pretty close. Let me do look at the numbers right now just to see kind of where he's at. But everybody else kind of seems about where I would think them to be. Steph Curry, we'll talk obviously about him here in a little bit, but yeah, him being as high on the list already is pretty cool as well. I mean, obviously he's been there for 7 seasons. He's had 3 or 4 super prolific scoring seasons, but yeah, for him to be as high as he is and knocking on the door, which we'll talk about again in a sec, knocking on the door of the tops and top in the franchise is pretty cool to see, especially when that franchise's head is Wilt Chamberlain. Oh, Clay's 11, so he's right.
Yeah,
he's right. He's
is,
got to care like 1,100 points more, and then he'll be over Joe Barry Carroll. So there you go.
Yeah. Shouldn't be too hard. I think he'll probably get that this season, so he'll be so Joe Barry will be knocked out of top 10, sadly, but yeah. So, so Curry's not too far away from Wilt, in fact, to be the leading scorer of the franchise.
Yeah, no, so Curry, if assuming he maintains last year's numbers with, obviously with Durant by his side, he's never going to be the same sort of gigantic score that we saw for a few years there, but he's still going to be quite a good scorer. If we assume that, obviously he keeps up the same production he had last year, Durant keeps up his production or whatever, we're looking at a little over 2 seasons until he tops Wilt. So not that long for Steph Curry. What will be interesting though to see is, if Durant were to get hurt or something like that, if Curry could return to that and maybe accelerate that a little bit. But one way or another, a little over 2 seasons of Curry staying in Golden State, and he will become presumably the top scorer in franchise history. So pretty cool.
So next is the Houston Rockets, and number 1 is Hakeem Olajuwon with 26,511 points, 22.5 points per game average, 12th in among the 30 players in points per game, and 5th among point leaders. I would say definitively is the best player in franchise history. There are 6 players with above 10,000 points for the franchise. Calvin Murphy is next with almost 18,000. Rudy Tomjanovich, Elvin Hayes, Moses Malone, and both around 11,000. And James Harden almost at 11,000 as well. He's number 6 total with 27.4 points per game when he's been with the Rockets. Rounding out the list, our Yao Ming, Robert Reed, Mike Newlin, and Otis Thorpe. I think the most interesting thing here, of course, is Harden, despite relatively short career in Houston, he's played 5 years there now, but is pretty high up on this list. Probably going to be passing Moses Malone and Elvin Hayes pretty soon. Probably not going to get there I don't know. I guess you can talk a little bit about whether he has a shot at being number one.
Well, I think in one respect, it does speak to Hakeem's longevity, that it's going to take James Harden a little under 7 years. His current production was about 2,300 plus points per year to top Hakeem. Harden's 28, so I mean, 7 years at 28, that's tough to do. It's tough to kind of keep that level of production, and even if he drops off a little bit, you're probably adding a few more years onto that. So really, we're looking at the chance of 7 to 10 years it's going to take Harden to top Hakeem, which again speaks to just how great Hakeem was. And even Harden in this atmosphere of the current NBA, and in obviously the D'Antoni offense the past year or whatever, that he's obviously jumped up a little bit and has the potential to jump up for the next few years. But yeah, still it's going to take him 7 years at the current production. Probably you're looking at 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that range before he's even really contending for Hakeem. So pretty interesting in that respect that he hasn't been around that long with the Rockets, but I think it says more, I think, about Hakeem's longevity and how dominant and how great he was, that Harden is still close but pretty far away.
Yeah, and if it hadn't been for Hakeem, the Rockets would be another franchise with a lot of players who had incredible short-term success there but didn't stay there. I mean, obviously Moses Malone won 2 MVPs while in Houston. Elvin Hayes was a really good player in his first stint there, and then went back toward the end of his career. Obviously, Yao was a great player without a lot of longevity and not. And not even making this list, he's 13th overall in franchise history, was a Tracy McGrady with just under 7,000 points. So, actually, it's slightly surprising that he was not on there. Of course, we've talked about his injury struggles in past episodes, but yeah, just barely outside of there. So, another team where, they've had the great players, but mostly for short periods of time, of course, with, Hakeem being the exception. And looking like Harden, you're going to be a guy who's going to be there for a long time. Yeah, whether he'll be able to make it, because, obviously, he had one of the great he's had, incredible scoring seasons for a while. He's going to slow down a little bit, probably with Chris Paul, being there and sharing the ball a little bit more. And, of course, as he gets older, there's no question he's going to slow down. But, yeah, he could play there another 8 years or so and be really good, and I think there's a good chance he'll be number 2 on this list. He's about 7,000 or so behind the number 2 guy. So another 4 years or so he's going to probably pass that. So next, Reggie Miller of the Indiana Pacers is the leading scorer in Pacers history, not surprisingly, with 25,279 points, 18.2 points per game, almost actually more than or very close to doubling up Rick Smith's at number 2 with 12,871. A couple of things that surprised me here. Is it surprising to you that Reggie only averaged 18.2 points per game? And do we think that, I would say with his longevity, Reggie Miller is probably the best player in franchise history. But if you're talking about peak players, there's a lot of guys on this list, I think, who are arguably better peak players than Reggie.
Yeah, you mentioned a few here, like Roger Brown, Dennis McGinnis, Mel Daniels, Paul George, probably better peak players. I think the thing with Reggie, in one respect, is the 18.2 points per game we look at. Points per 100 possessions, which you did a little bit of a rundown here. In terms of full career, if we look at some other scores, Reggie Miller's at 27.5 points per 100 possessions, so obviously a lot more than his 18.2 points per game. Havlicek, he goes to 22.5. Alex English is 30.2. Dirk is 32.4. Isaiah Thomas is 25.7. And the Dominique is 34.7. So we see some guys who go up a little bit. We see John Havlicek who kind of comes down a little bit. And obviously Reggie Miller goes up a lot when you add a little bit more possessions. And I thought this kind of interesting too, so I decided to kind of dive into it a little bit. The Pacers team pace during Miller's career is interesting. Here's they ranked in the league: 16, 15, 16, 7, 5, 18, 22, 25, 27, 21, 27, 26, 15, 25, 7, 10, 26, and 29. So really, save for a few years where they had a little bit okay. They had 1 year, 2 years where they were 7, and 1 year where they were 5th. The rest of the time, they're in the bottom half of the league, almost to the bottom, third of the league in terms of pace. So he just kind of seemed like he always played on a team. And I don't know if it's a chicken and egg, is because they had Reggie Miller, they played at a slower pace, or they played at a slower pace and Reggie Miller kind of had to adapt to that style. It's hard to say. Obviously he had been there for so long, but yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting debate. I thought he would have had more than that, and he seemed like a much bigger scorer, and he probably was for the era a little bit bigger of a scorer if we see, in terms of the points per 100 possessions. But overall, it doesn't jump off the page nearly as much as it maybe should, or as much as we think. We kind of think of Reggie Miller being synonymous with the Indiana Pacers and being a great scorer for the Indiana Pacers. And I don't know, it doesn't really bear out all that much. I mean, he was their best scorer in the 90s, obviously, and it was a semi-successful team. But yeah, his numbers don't really jump out as much as you would sort of assume they would.
Yeah, I mean, there are other ways to measure scoring other than points per game, but it was pretty low, considering it wasn't like he was providing like great defense or other things. I mean, obviously he's known for the stepping up in the big playoff moments and that sort of stuff. And that's certainly very meaningful. But yeah, as far as like being one of the better scorers in NBA history, which I think a lot of people would agree that he is, at least for a guard, he's certainly not like prolific in the same way that a lot of these guys are. Even if you adjust for pace with the points per 100 possessions, he's higher than like Havlicek, who played in a really fast pace for most of his career, but he's lower than like Dominique or Dirk, who I would think, are guys who are, primarily their value came from scoring. So just interesting. As far as the other guys on the list, Billy Knight, actually third all time, which I thought was interesting, was ahead of some of the better players in French's history. Roger Brown was fourth, Jermaine O'Neal fifth, Danny Granger, George McGinnis was seventh, just popped into the Hall of Fame, of course, part of those part of the ABA years. Vern Fleming, who I was not someone I was expecting to be on this list from 85 to 95 with the Pacers. Mel Daniels won an MVP in the ABA, and Freddie Lewis, another ABA vet. So that era is represented pretty well here. Paul George actually not in the top 10. I forget exactly where he ranked. He was somewhere around like 12, 13 or so. But a little bit surprising. But I guess he didn't really play there all that long, and he wasn't necessarily the first couple years in his career, he wasn't scoring as much as obviously.
Danny Granger was the guy for a few years there, and then obviously he took over shortly thereafter. But yeah, it took him a little while. As far as active leaders, I don't. I wouldn't worry if I was anybody. Lance Stevenson he's at 1,953, 58th, and then Miles Turner, who he's at 1,792. I'm just going to ignore Lance Stevenson because I don't think it wasn't worth doing the math to figure out Lance Stevenson. That's going to be a while. I don't think that's happening. Turner, though, he would need a little over 6 seasons at his current scoring pace to reach the top 10. You can kind of assume that he's probably going to score a little bit more now with Paul George gone. So I don't know. Maybe you can make that just about 6 seasons, maybe 5 or 6 or so to get in the top 10. So that'll be interesting to see. It's going to take him though about 20 years to reach Miller's spot. So again, even if his scoring really gets better, you're looking at 18 to 20 years still. So I don't think he's going to be the all time. But the fact that it's only going to take hypothetically 5-6 years for him to get in the top 10 speaks a little bit to the franchise in their history as well.
Yeah, it's going to take some overdrive for Miles Turner to be able to make it into to make it to that illustrious company. But yeah, even popping in the top 10 would be pretty good. So next, obviously, you want to shoot for Vern Fleming.
Right, everybody,
want to break all the records for Vern Fleming has. So yeah. So next, the Los Angeles Clippers, also Buffalo Braves franchise. Next is Randy Smith. Might surprise a lot of people to be in there. He averaged 8 points per game and had 12,735 points for total his career, but which of course is relatively low considering the length of time the Clippers have been around. But with the Clippers' historically bad repetition, not exactly that huge of a surprise. He is 27th in points per game, 24th in total points overall. And he played for the Braves from 72 to 78, then played when they moved to San Diego, became the Clippers in 79, and then popped up again in 1983. He is famous for playing in 906 straight games, and I had missed that in our previous episode looking at two-sport athletes, but he actually, in 1975 to age 26, he tried out for the expansion Tampa Bay Rowdies of the North American Soccer League, indoor soccer, which you kind of briefly had it was a fad, I guess, in the late 70s, and it had some success. And unfortunately for him, the Braves would not allow him to play professional soccer at the time during the off season. He did had another couple of tryouts, but it just didn't really happen for him, even though he had been a 2-time college soccer All-American. So would have been an interesting venture into a two-sport athlete, but it was
I found that exact same thing today when I was looking up Randy Smith. I was like, what did Randy Smith's career do? And then I found that fact and I was like, oh man, a week too late for this Randy Smith fun fact, but definitely good there. As far as active leaders, I mean, obviously Blake Griffin is going to be your guy that you're looking at right here. In terms of how long it's going to take him, assuming health for Griffin, which is a large assumption given Blake Griffin's career, but when he last played 80 games in a season, he had a 1,900 point score in the season. So let's take that number and use that. Just really ambitious here. We really want the Clippers to do it. Take him a little under a year and a half to take over Randy Smith's mark. He's probably not going to play 80 games and always be healthy. So assuming that he has a little bit of a drop off, it's going to be quite a few years. But I think, provided he sticks around in LA, which I guess right now seems a little bit better than it maybe did a few years ago. If he does stick around, I think will in time take over Randy Smith, but it might take a little bit longer depending on his health and what he can do in terms of just staying on the court more than anything. Because production's going to kind of always be there, or at least it has always been there for Blake Griffin, but it's just a matter of health for him, really.
Yeah, definitely, and he's he's a better all-time player. Randy Smith was a good player, but he's definitely a better all-time player. And I think on his way to being probably the best Clipper in history. He got that extension, so he's probably going to be there for quite a while. So, probably I would say that's Chris Paul right now, but probably going to pass him at some point in terms of longevity and having already has been there longer than Paul since he got an earlier start. But the other guys on this list are Bob McAdoo with 9,434 points. Elton Brand right behind him. Corey Maggette, then Chris Paul is 6th. Danny Manning 7th. Loy Vaught is 8th. Ken Norman is 9. And DeAndre Jordan is 10th on this list with only 9.1 points per game. I kind of thought he actually scored a little bit more points per game than that, but his are lower than I would have expected.
It is a little interesting there in terms of that franchise, and it's it's not the greatest list of names, but it's the Clippers, that's for sure. Loy Vaught is in there, so
it's gotten better recently.
It's gotten much better. It's
yes,
Danny Manning and Loy Vaught. There you go.
Yes, so. A better team history, the Los Angeles Lakers, led by Kobe Bryant with 33,643 points, averaging 25 points per game. He is 9th on this list in points per game, 2nd in total points. Best player in franchise history? I think you and I would argue no. Some would disagree. I think it's a discussion.
Are you saying some people would disagree? Wait, hold on a minute. Are you saying that people that think Kobe Bryant is the all-time would disagree or be apt to argue in favor of Kobe Bryant about anything? Kobe Bean Bryant?
I've heard people do this.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Does he have defenders in terms of fans? I don't know. I've never sensed that. So okay, well, if you say so.
Hey, they're retiring his numbers. So he's retiring both numbers, 8 and 24. Yeah. So. It's so great they have to retire both numbers.
You did make a great joke on Twitter of what number are the Miami Heat going to retire to, which is my favorite joke ever. Is the Miami Heat retired too many numbers side swipe is one of my favorite basketball jokes ever. So,
yes. There are 12 players for the franchise who are above 10,000 points. Jerry West is 2nd. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar right behind him with just over 24,000 points. Elgin Baylor right behind him with 23,000 points. And I think I mentioned on Twitter the other day, but I love that Kareem, if you just include his Lakers career, has more points than Elgin Baylor and just under the amount of points that Jerry West had, which just is kind of amazing. I mean, he did play for 14 years for the Lakers, but still, if you could add that to, of course, his total career numbers, it's pretty amazing. But and also Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Shaquille O'Neal with almost 14,000 points, Gail Goodrich, Byron Scott, Jamal Wilkes, George Mikan, and Vern Mickelson of the 50s Lakers were on there as well at over 10,000 points. So active leader has a little ways to go, though.
Yeah, Jordan Clarkson is the active leader. He's got 3,133, so not too bad at 14.2 points per game. Obviously, I think that's going to go down as the Lakers get better. But it's he's about 30,510 points away from Kobe. Assuming he keeps up his production from last season, which is a pretty large assumption, it'll be a little over 25 seasons until he catches Kobe. But I don't know if I don't think. No, I don't think.
Maybe not quite.
So
yeah, no. Yeah. Also, the Lakers have 4 players above 20,000 points, which is the most of any franchise. I think there were 23 players overall who have more than 20,000 points with a team. So they have about a fourth, or I guess a sixth of those. So pretty impressive, obviously. Next is the Memphis Grizzlies, led by Mike Conley with just over 10,000 points in his career at 14 points per game, which is 29th in points per game and 28th in points for this list. Is he the best player in franchise history? It's debatable. I mean, Marc Gasol and Pau Gasol are both probably on the list. I think Zach Randolph might get thrown there as well. I think those are the kind of the 4 guys. I think he's very close to. I'd put one of the Gasols maybe slightly above him, but I think he has a case for that. I think he sort of. What this era of Grizzlies basketball has meant: solid, consistent, reliable, grindy, gritty. I think he exemplifies that. So I think he's a good stalwart for that, for being on the list. And Marc Gasol is right behind him with 9,592 points. Possible that Marc could pass him. He has a slightly higher points per game average. So maybe with if they continue both those averages, maybe he'll just slightly pass them after a couple more years. You never know.
No, it's pretty interesting there for their franchise. But yeah, it's pretty much a collection of just current guys. But they're a younger franchise, so we'll see how it kind of goes over time. But yeah, I thought somewhat interesting though is that only one guy that I would consider really a Vancouver Grizzly, or really any Vancouver Grizzly, Sharif Abdul-Rahim is the only one. The rest of the guys are all Memphis based, which makes sense because they had obviously success with Memphis and been in Memphis now a lot more than they were in Vancouver. But yeah, still pretty interesting there.
Yeah, I guess I think they moved in 01, so that's I guess 15 years versus 5 years, so or 16 years. So interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but next we have the Miami Heat. Dwayne Wade with 20,221 points, 23.7 points per game. He's 10th in points per game, 15th in points among the 30 players. I would argue that if you consider just obviously the longevity of been here and the success he's had, I would say he's the best player in franchise history. I would say LeBron was better at peak, but I would weigh Wade's contributions during that LeBron period and outside of it as being slightly better than LeBron's just in that narrow period. But we could argue about that. But who wants to argue about that?
No, not me, and I don't think you do either. So
yes. No, not particularly. So, also on the list, Alonzo Mourning with 9,459. Glenn Rice right behind him, above 9,000. LeBron's actually fourth, almost 8,000 points. Chris Bosh with almost 7,000 points. Ronnie Cycli, Udonis Haslem, who is has the lowest points per game of any franchise top 10 with 7.8 points per game with 64,000 points. Then next is Tim Hardaway, Eddie Jones, and Grant Long. So not really, outside of the big 3, not the most illustrious list there. I mean, Glenn Rice was very good for a while, and obviously Alonzo Mourning, was great up until the kidney ailments. But yes, the big 3 definitely dominating the list.
Yeah, as far as active leaders, Goran Dragic and Hassan Whiteside are the 2 we're looking at here. Goran Dragic is at 2,933. Whiteside is at 2,913. Assuming Dragic maintains last year's 1,400 point total, he's looking at about 12 more seasons than Whiteside. It's going to be a while for Whiteside too. So I didn't even bother looking at those guys. But yeah, I think Wade's safe for quite a while.
Yes, I would say so as well. So. Next, the Milwaukee Bucks, led by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with 14,211 points, 30.4 points per game. He's third in points per game, 23rd in total points. And over his 6 seasons in Milwaukee, I would say he is the best player in franchise history, led them to their only championship and won several MVPs with Milwaukee. I think that's a fair assessment, even though they've had some great success, including in the 80s. That was not necessarily fueled by a single superstar like it was for during that time. They do have 6 players above 10,000 for the franchise. Glenn Robinson, Sidney Moncrief, Michael Redd fourth. He was a little higher than I expected, honestly, with 11,000 points. Bob Dandridge right behind him, Marcus Johnson above 10,000, and then Junior Bridgman, Brian Winters, Ray Allen, and Terry Cummings rounding out the list at above 9,000 points. So obviously a very good list there. Ray Allen probably was really good for the Bucks. Probably would have been higher if he'd he definitely would have been higher if he'd stuck around there. Another probably probable Hall of Famer on this list. Other than that, I mean, actually, other than Kareem, there is no Hall of Famer on this list. Although there's guys who I think we talked about Sidney Moncrief before should be a Hall of Famer. Bob Dandridge should probably be a Hall of Famer. Marcus Johnson should probably be a Hall of Famer. I think Ray Allen will be. So it's kind of interesting that three really underrated guys on this list, and they all have been playing for Milwaukee.
Yeah, and as far as an active leader, we got a little conversation here in terms of Giannis Antetokounmpo. He is your active leader. He's 21st right now, 4,737. How soon he can become the top 10 or even the leader? It's pretty interesting here. He's currently only 9,474 away from Kareem, so he's not too far. I mean, that's a lot, but that's not insane. Last year at 1,800 at age 22. So if he keeps that up, and obviously if he stays with the franchise, I mean, age-wise and production-wise, I feel like he can stick with it. It's just a matter of sticking with the franchise. He can be the top in a little over 5 years. He can be the top. But as far as top 10, a little over 2.5 seasons, and he'll be in there. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. And, of course, if he sticks with the team, what that can say. And really, he could become, one of the franchise bests if he sticks around for a while. But that'll be the big question there if he hangs around.
Yeah, there's definitely a realistic time frame for him to do that. Obviously, I mean, doesn't seem like there's a reason why he wouldn't stick with the franchise, but of course, you never know what's going to happen with things. But next, the Minnesota Timberwolves, Kevin Garnett, not surprisingly, way ahead of anybody else. 19,201 points with the Timberwolves and 19.8 points per game. He's 18th in points per game, 16th in total points. Very definitely the best player in franchise history. He's the only player with more than 10,000 points for the franchise. Of any other players who have 5,000 points, there's only four others. Sam Mitchell, Kevin Love, Wally Szczerbiak, and Doug West are up there. So obviously they've not been around as long as several franchises, but the fact there's only five guys on this list is telling. However, Andrew Wiggins very close to being so going to cross 5,000 points, only 5 points away from that. And Karl Anthony Towns further down on the list, but certainly another guy who's 15th right now and likely to sneak into the top 10.
As far as Wiggins, he was at a 1,900 point scored pace last year. He would need about 7.5 more seasons of that. And then Karl Anthony Towns, the 2,000 point pace where he was last season would need a little under 8 seasons. So it'll be interesting to see those guys if they stick around with the franchise and keep up their current production. They both have, I think, semi-reasonable chances given, their ages and where they are in their careers. Again, similar to Giannis, it's just going to be a matter of sticking with the franchise for a length of time is going to be the most important factor here.
Yeah,
and health too, of course. Yeah,
as well. But obviously, But I think Towns and I think he's talented enough, and Wiggins probably he obviously can score if nothing else. So certainly a possibility there. Another franchise we already talked about their tricky history, the New Orleans Pelicans. Since 2003, we are evaluating them, and their leading scorer is David West, 28th in points per game, 30th in point total. The total points is 8,690 and 16.4 points per game. Definitely not the best player in franchise history, although he's probably top 3 or 4. Chris Paul and Anthony Davis, who are right behind him in the scoring total, would be there. Interesting that, of course, West and Paul were both Hornets and not Pelicans, so actually Anthony Davis is the only true Pelican on this list, and is the active leader, and is probably pretty close to actually becoming number one.
Yeah, he's only about a 1,193 away. He had 2,000 and then 99 last season, and he's had 13,000 or more, or 1,300 more each of the last 4 seasons. So he almost surely, as long as he's not traded or something goes awry, he'll become the number one this season. So provided health and he sticks with the team, he will take the top spot as the New Orleans franchise leader.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it would be very surprising if eventually maybe could leave the team, but it'd be surprising.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he's another guy to keep an eye on for the rest of the year. So the Hornets and the Pelicans are going to have possibly new leaders soon.
Yes. There you go. It just confuses even more. Next is the New York Knicks, and the leader is Patrick Ewing with 23,665 points, pretty far ahead of Walt Frazier with almost 15,000 points a long time. So he's kind of blew the way of the competition, but has a great longevity. Obviously, 22.8 points per game, which is 11th among the 30 players, 9th in total points. I would say probably is the best player in franchise history because of that longevity. Although Frazier and Reed both have, who are 2 and 3 on the list, both have a case we could discuss. They actually have 7 players with above 10,000 for the franchise. Allen Houston was 4th, which kind of surprised me at 11,000. Carl Braun next, who played from the late 40s to the early 60s. I think he was not on the team that entire time, but most of that time. Richie Guerin and was 6th, who was a great scorer in his day. Carmelo Anthony is 7th, and who has crossed 10,000. And then rounding out is Earl Monroe, Dick Barnett, and Bill Bradley, who are all over 9,000 points. And other than Carmelo, who it's of course kind of a question about how long he is going to be with the franchise. If he sticks with the team at least for this year, he definitely has the opportunity to move up in those ranks. And then further down from that, it's going to be a while.
So Porzingis, he's the active leader right now. He's 72nd, 2,224 points. He's quite a ways away. It's if we use his pace from last season, it's going to take about 18 seasons for Porzingis to do it. So unless he becomes a way better scorer than we imagined, or suddenly turns it on and becomes just that much better of a scorer, or he's just a guy there that's in that franchise for the next 20 years or whatever, it's going to be a while for him. And I don't expect Porzingis to be with the Knicks for another 20 years. So we'll see. But it looks like for now, Patrick Ewing is safe.
So, I mean, he averaged 18 points per game last year. So, I could see him getting into like the low to mid 20s, as he really becomes kind of the guy there.
When Carmelo, departs, inevitably when he departs, he'll bump up a little bit there. So, I mean, you probably maybe can shave a few years off that, but or maybe a year or so off that. But we're still looking at 16, 17, 18 seasons for him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at 15. You're looking at incredible longevity. Being with one franchise for his entire career,
especially the Knicks,
rare, especially for the Knicks. So,
especially the Knicks, given the Knicks, it seems unlikely that he's going to stick around. But
the fact that Ewing was able to do it, is remarkable. So, and didn't even, obviously left late in his career, but he was there for that long. So, yeah. Next is the Sonics Thunder franchise. Of course, weird to have their histories mixed, but it is.
People get very upset when you do this, but it's true. It's the way they do it. Well, so I'm sorry.
It is. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it isn't quite. Yeah, obviously, the Thunder don't really honor the Sonics history or recognize it in particular, understandably, given the situation, I guess. But anyway, so leading the way, Gary Payton with 18,207 points, 18.2 points per game. He is 25th in points per game, actually tied with Reggie Miller of the 30 on the list, and 18th in total points. Interesting discussion on best player in franchise history, because of course we have Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook right behind them in scoring total. Durant left just before he was able to break that. He's about 700 behind Peyton for that. Obviously not going to do that. And Westbrook is a couple thousand behind Durant. So and seemingly very likely to just break that. You'll get to that in a little bit, but I would say Durant is the best peak player of them. Westbrook obviously will be with the Thunder at least for another season. He's going to be a free agent and possibly for longer, so he could break that as well. But Peyton has better longevity than the two of them, so that's interesting little discussion.
Yeah, in terms of I don't. Yeah, it's hard to say. I think, man, it's. It's going to be interesting. I mean, I think Westbrook is going to sort of take that over pretty soon. But I guess would you go Gary Payton right now?
I would actually probably go Durant right now, okay. but I think Westbrook's probably going to pass him with longevity. Now, if Westbrook only plays one more season, then and then leaves and goes somewhere else, then that's a really interesting discussion, because I would think the three are kind of all like right at a similar level in terms, because I think Durant's the best peak player, although what Westbrook did last year was pretty amazing, and and Peyton was more like a tier below, but did it for a longer period of time. And the way that he was the best defensive player of the threes, and that I don't know, and led them to. I mean, Durant and Westbrook went to a finals too, so that's hard to. I don't know exactly where I stand on that one.
As far as active leaders, of course, Westbrook, we mentioned, and he's gonna, it seems pretty possible he's gonna do. We're a very pessimistic podcast, by the way. We're basically like every guy that's good on a team that's not great. We're like, Davis is gone, this guy's gone, Giannis is leaving, this guy, we're just basically assuming everyone's leaving, but we'll see here in a little bit. But Westbrook, if he stays, it's gonna get awkward here for the Sonics fans, because he's only 3,051 away. He had 2,558 last season, so that's going to go down obviously with Paul George this season, but even if we put that down to 2,000, it's only going to take about a season and a half for him to pass Gary Payton. So if he stays with the franchise, even for another 2 years, I think it's pretty likely that he's going to become the number one.
Mm-hmm. For what it's worth, the rest of the leading scorers in the franchise history are all Sonics. Fred Brown with about 14,000, Jack Sikma with 12,000, Rashard Lewis just over 10,000, Sean Kemp also just over 10,000, Gus Williams with 9,600, Dale Elvis and Xavier McDaniel to rounding out that list. So a lot of course some 90s players, Rashard in the 2000s. I'm actually a little surprised Ray Allen didn't quite make that list, but I guess he did not play for the Sonics for all that long. So, but there you go. And of course, some of the great players from the 79 championship team. And next is the Orlando Magic. And Dwight Howard leads the way with 11,435 points, 18.4 points per game. He's 24th in points per game, 26th in total points among these 30 players. Best player in franchise history? This is an interesting question. I would say probably not, even though he played longer than Shaq or McGrady, or I think the impact that they had. I would probably put Shaq at the top of this list. He is fifth on the list of most points with 8,000, despite only playing 4 seasons. Dwight played there for I think 9 seasons, or 8 seasons. So it's a debate, but I would say probably not quite.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another interesting one as well, because there's not really a guy that jumps out, and it just seems so icky to say Dwight Howard, It's, man. T-Mac just seems like he was there for a lot longer, too, you know what I mean? Like, especially this week and kind of reliving his career, he seems like a guy that was there forever, and he was really only there, 4 seasons, so it's tricky there. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's Dwight Howard, but that feels icky. I don't like that.
Yeah, it's a little weird. But yeah, so also crossing the 10,000 threshold is Nick Anderson. I would say might be the worst to 10,000 points for any franchise player on this list. Now, he was a fine player, but not, when he's the only other guy with 10,000 points. It says something about your franchise history, which, basically the biggest stars have not lasted. Tracy McGrady is third. Jameer Nelson is fourth, was there for a long time. Shaq, as we mentioned, is fifth. Hida Turkoglu is sixth. And Penny Hardaway seventh with just over 7,000 points. Dennis Scott, Daryl Armstrong, and Nikola Vucevic rounding out the list.
Yeah, and he's our active leader right now. And sadly, he's nearly halfway there. He's only 5,911 behind, assuming last season's output of 1,000 points. He'll be there in a little under 6 seasons, but he's regressing pretty fast as well, so I don't know exactly what he's going to do, but this is kind of a sad franchise, the Magic, so move on to better times with our next team.
Angering our
they know. Come on, like they don't know that the franchise is sad. They're aware of it.
Oh.
I like the Magic. I always wanted the Magic to be good, but it's just like Yeah, the last post Dwight years have been. It's like, all right, we're ready, and we suck again. All right, sorry. Like we're rebuilding, and we suck. Sorry, no good. Nope, restart.
Yeah, they're not quite at the Kings.
No, yeah, exactly. So there's one way. Yeah,
so
that's what their slogan is this year. We're not the Kings. Yeah. Orlando Magic.
Yes.
At least we're not the Kings.
Timberwolves actually probably
exactly. They can't use the Timberwolves anymore.
Finally, at least we're not the Kings. It's true. Yes. So next we have the The Philadelphia 76ers, of course, with the Syracuse Nationals as well. Hal Greer is your leader at 21,586, 19.2 points per game. That might surprise a lot of people, obviously, with Iverson, Dr. J, Wilt Chamberlain all on the franchise. But Hal Greer is actually your leader, and we've talked about before. Probably not the best player in franchise history. In fact, I would say certainly not, but a really excellent player. Had a lot of All-NBA appearances during this time. One of the best guards of his era, and of course, an important part of that 67 championship team. Rounding out the list, also second was Iverson, which is under 20,000 points. Dolph Shays, Julius Erving with just over 18,000. Charles Barkley is actually fifth on here, and you always kind of think about his 76ers tenure as fairly short, but he actually did quite a lot in those 8 seasons. Billy Cunningham, Red Kerr, Maurice Cheeks, and then Andre Iguodala. We're kind of surprised that he was ninth on the list, and then Chet Walker rounding it out as well.
And as far as our active leader, number 57, Robert Covington at 2,665 at 13.1 points per game. He vaulted up the board in a lot of ways due to the process. He was kind of there for the entire thing, and he's one of the unearthed gems of the process. But he's 18,000 back, a little under 19,000 back. And you'd imagine his output is going to shrink considerably over the next few years as the team kind of gets better and there's an influx of talent and guys like a Ben Simmons come in and Markel Fultz and those sort of guys. So even if he maintains the output that he's been doing right now of 860 points per season, it'll take 22 seasons. So that's it's going to be a lot of processes for Robert Covington. So I don't think that's happening.
Yes. So next is the Phoenix Suns with Walter Davis, maybe another surprise to some people, with 15,666 points and a 20.5 points per game average. He's 17th in points per game, 21st in points. It's really interesting with the Suns because I feel like this is a reflection somewhat on them, is that they've had, they are the winningest franchise, I believe, in NBA history that has not won a championship. And I think that says somebody like Walter Davis, who was, really good for quite a while, but is sort of unheralded in NBA history and is, not necessarily the first person I would think of in terms of this list, although, because I would say there are several players who are actually better than he is, who are, not, who even not quite as good as scorers, but more complete players on than this. But it's just sort of he's I think emblematic to a certain extent of the franchise's history, because it's just kind of hard to. They've had a lot of really good teams, but not a lot of super memorable teams.
Yeah, no real dynasties either. Like, you'll have little blips here and there. You obviously had the Nash, the 8 seconds or 7 seconds or less teams.
That was a memorable team. So obviously that's not right to say that that wasn't memorable, but obviously, they did not. They were
exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the closest you have, and then of course you have the blip in the '90s with Barkley and a little bit of the early '90s. But yeah, it's really just kind of been a franchise that's been hard to define by one team. I mean, I think I would say the 7 seconds or less team is probably their most poignant or their biggest dynasty or whatever. But other than that, it really hasn't been, and it really hasn't been a star driven thing either. Because even the 7 seconds or less was Amari, Marion, Nash. It was kind of the sum of all parts versus a superstar putting them on their back and dominating. And I think that kind of gets reflected here in Walter Davis being the man. You play 10 seasons with the same team and you're kind of the top of the list of this. So
yeah. And Alvin Album's right behind him, who played, basically during that same era as well, with almost 14,000 points. And then Kevin Johnson, who I think is one of the better players, of course, with that 93 team and throughout the entire 90s when they were very good for that time. And they were really good in that, those late 70s, into the 80s. For most of those years, they were a pretty effective team as well. Sean Marion is fourth. Dick Van Arsdale is fifth. Amari Stoudemire is sixth. He prolific scorer, of course, but not the longevity there. Steve Nash is seventh, of course, great player, 2 MVPs, but not the greatest scorer. Then rounded up by Paul Westphal, Larry Nance, and Dan Marley.
Yeah, and as far as active leaders, I guess in a way surprising, but not necessarily. Eric Bledsoe, he's 26th right now, 4,162, averaging 18.8 points per game. He's surprisingly still about 11,000 away, so if he keeps up his pace that he had last year, which was about 1,300, he'll be tops in a little under 9 seasons, and he's only about 3 seasons away from getting into the top 10. So again, provided he sticks around with the team, a possibility, but he's a guy who's a little older than you would probably think Eric Bledsoe is. So yeah, I don't see him ever get into the top spot, but it seems reasonable that he could get in the top 10.
Yeah, he's 28. So yeah, that's top 10 certainly is a possibility, but yeah, probably not not getting there. Yeah, whether he'll, of course, with the timeline that the franchise is on, it could be leaving, before long. We're always pessimistic about guys leaving the team, but I don't think Suns fans are going to mind that one so much. Yeah. They're looking for brighter days in the future. Yeah. The Portland Trailblazers, Clyde Drexler leading the way with 18,040 points and 20.8 average, 15th in points per game, tied with Havlicek, and 19th in total points. I would say he's clearly the best player in franchise history. I mean, obviously there's Walton, but he really only played, a short time with the franchise. I think Drexler's longevity, puts him above that, and they did make 2 finals with Drexler as their best player. So, he's close to that level as well. They've actually had 6 players above 10,000 points. LaMarcus Aldridge second, Terry Porter right behind him, Cliff Robinson, Jerome Kersey, Jim Paxson all over 10,000 points. Jim Paxson always kind of surprises me on that list because I don't think of him quite as that good of a player. Then Jeff Petrie, Michael Thompson, Rasheed Wallace, Sidney Wicks, and right behind Sidney Wicks, 2 points behind Sidney Wicks, is actually Damian Lillard, also the active leader on the
team. Yeah, and he's making a pretty good charge. He's only about 9,160 away, so we had a 2,000 last season. So, if he keeps that up, which, he might fall a little bit, but I feel like a Damian Lillard could probably keep up around that pace or near that pace for the next few seasons. 4.5 seasons for him, and he'll be number 1. He's already he's just below top 10, but I think he's going to score 2 points next season. I'm presuming he doesn't belong in the preseason. Damian Lillard will score 2 points in the next season, and if he does that, he's going to pass a few guys this season as well if he has his normal production, and probably end up, I don't know, maybe even 4th by the time the end of the season, or at least 5th. But yeah, he's definitely vaulting up the leaderboards, and yeah, it's going to take a little while to get up to Drexler, but he's definitely in the conversation and should be there pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he's 27, so I think he's got a shot at, he'd probably be more like 5 or 6 years, but I think that's not completely unreasonable for him. He certainly, I think he's on track to be number 2 for definitely. So next are the Sacramento Kings / Rochester Cincinnati Royals, Kansas City Kings, lots of cities and names for that franchise. Don't forget Omaha as well, the Kings, Kansas City Omaha Kings. Anyway, number 1, Oscar Robertson with 22,009 points and 29.3 points per game scoring average. He's 4th in points per game, 11th in points total. Clearly the best player in franchise history. And interesting that they've only had 4 players above 10,000 points, despite having such a, being one of the original teams that we talked about. Those besides Oscar are Jack Twyman, Mitch Richmond, who had just over 12,000 points for the Kings, and Tiny Archibald, who had almost 11,000 points. And then after there, 5th is Sam Lacey, 1 point behind him before he got traded, DeMarcus Cousins. So just 1 point behind Sam Lacey. Couldn't quite get there. Peja Stojakovic, and Jerry Lucas, Eddie Johnson, and Scott Wedman rounding out the list there. So interesting list. Of course, the Kings have mostly struggled historically. After they've had the championship in 51, they had some good years, of course, with Oscar, and Kansas City for the most part, they did not have strong seasons. And then outside of that early 2000s period, not much in Sacramento, unfortunately, as well.
Yeah, and as far as their active leader, I mean, obviously with Cousins going away, it gets a little it gets a little dicey here. Their active leader at 124 is Willie Cauley-Stein, 1,074, 7.6 points per game. So yeah, this is not fun. He's 20,935 away. He had 611 points last season, so he'll be waiting about 34 years to beat Oscar Robertson, and about 13 more to get in the top 10. So even if he scores a little bit more next season, which I don't know, I guess he maybe could. Maybe we can put that down to 32 seasons until he can beat Oscar Robertson. But yeah, it's gonna it's gonna be a little while for Willie Cauley-Stein. Don't put that in your phone. I'm not betting that one very much. I forgot who the other one that we said put in your phone, but that guy definitely put in your phone.
Yeah.
Nikola Mirotic. Yeah, that one to lock in, but Willie Cauley-Stein, I wouldn't do that quite yet.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Next, a little bit better on the spectrum than Willie Cauley-Stein, Tim Duncan with the San Antonio Spurs with 26,496 points, 19 points per game. He is 22nd in points per game and 6th in total points. I would say clearly the best player in franchise history, although they've had obviously a number of great players, David Robinson and George Gervin as well. All three of those are above 20,000 points. They have 6 players above 10,000 with Tony Parker, who is about 18,000. I guess maybe he's kind of at the end now, and I think he's injured at least to start the year, but a possible candidate for 20,000 points in his career. Manu Ginobili with over 13,000, and James Silas with 10,000. Then you got Mike Mitchell, Sean Elliott, Larry Keenan, and Kawhi Leonard as 10th with 6,500 points. So gonna be a little while for him, but you can talk about that in a moment. But of course, quite an illustrious top of that list.
Yeah,
for sure.
So active leader, obviously Tony Parker, but I don't think Parker's going to have much of a contest.
No,
Gotta take him off the list there. But let's look at Kawhi Leonard though. He's 10th. He's interesting because he's about 19,988 away, which is quite a lot. It's going to be really tough for him. I mean, Duncan, you forget just how awesome Duncan was for as many years as he was. Kawhi has a chance of doing it if he sticks around with the franchise for quite a while, and continues being, as productive as he is. But the fact that he kind of had a late start and that his scoring isn't necessarily, it's very good, obviously, this year, but it's not like, I don't expect him to be, 25 a game for the next, 10 years or whatever. I think that's really tough to assume that. So, yeah, he's still quite a ways away. I don't know yet. I didn't do the exact math in terms of him because, it's just pretty nuts how far Duncan is ahead of Kawhi and anybody else really at this point for the Spurs.
Yeah, it would take at least 11 seasons from last year's pace, which would put him at 36.
Okay,
and last year was, like 25 points per game. That's pretty rare. He could get better, but yeah, that's, it's not impossible, but it's expecting that would, of course, would be pretty ridiculous. But yeah, I think there's a good chance, in fact, a very good chance that he'll get in that 10,000 club. He's only really 3 years away from that, and very possibly could be in that 20,000 club by the time all is said and done. But as far as passing Duncan, that's a lot to ask. Next, the Toronto Raptors. Leading the way, and also the active leader, DeMar DeRozan, with 11,456 points, 19.3 points per game. He's 19th among these in points per game, 25th in points. Interesting discussion about who the best player in franchise history is. I don't think it's DeMar right now. But if DeMar sticks around with the team for long enough, I think it could be one of those things where the longevity outweighs the peak, and he would pass, Bosh and Carter at some point. But I think that's and Lowry at some point as well, depending on how long Lowry sticks with the team. So I think that there's some interesting discussion to be had there.
Yeah, as far as those guys, yeah, it's tough. DeRozan, I think when it's all said and done, probably will be the man there. But yeah, it's a franchise. Like, I want to say Vince Carter, but like I'm sure most Raptors fans, I think they've kind of given it up now. But most Raptor fans would probably be a little upset by that. But I feel like Carter is still the guy. But yeah, it's becoming a little bit more of a discussion. Bosh is a guy who obviously had a very quite a few great years as well. But I feel like when it's all said and done, it's going to be DeRozan. But right now, I think I would go Vince Carter.
Yeah. Bosh is number 2 with just over 10,000 points. Carter had 9,420 points, so not quite 10,000. Number 4 on the list, Andre Iguodala with 6,581 points. Yeah. Morris Peterson is 5th. Lowry is 6th, so he'll be climbing up the ranks. He'll pass Bargnani this year, so that'll be a little bit better. At least he'll be in the top 4. And then Jose Calderon with more than 5,000 points. So yeah, that's obviously the Raptors' history has been better lately, but still not not a lot of guys up on above 5,000 points. Yes, which for new franchises is somewhat understandable.
You obviously don't want the junkyard dog in like your top 10. I don't know if he actually is, but it's just it's pretty interesting. But yeah, as time goes on, they'll work that out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, next, the Utah Jazz, who's no one should be surprised about this, but Karl Malone with 36,374 points, 25.4 points per game. That is first in overall points and 8th in points per game. Very clearly the best player in franchise history, although Stockton obviously paired along with him. The all-time combo that they had is not too far from him in terms of greatness. They actually have 4 players with more than 10,000 points for the franchise. Adrian Dantley did it as well in the early 80s, and Darrell Griffith from 81 to 91 as well. Also on the top 10 list is Thurl Bailey, Andre Karolinko, Pete Maravich, Gordon Hayward, of course, who just left with over 8,000 points. Darren Williams with 7,500 points. And Mehmet Okura with 7,200 points. So interesting list.
Yeah, your active leaders, Derek Favors at 19. He's got 5,128, averages about 12.1 points per game. This is going to be a little tricky for him. He's only 31,248 away. So even if we assume he goes back to his career high output of a little over 1,100, which is a few years ago, he's about 28 seasons away from a lone spot. So he is probably only about 2 seasons away from the top 10. And given sort of what's happened with the Jazz and assuming he gets a little bit healthy, I think he can get in that top 10 before it's all said and done. But I do not think he is going to be taking over Carmelo's spot. So.
Yeah, not so much. He shoot for Pete Maravich. Yeah, it's definitely possible. He's about 3,000 points behind Pete. So, over 3 or 4 years, that's definitely a possibility. In our final franchise, the Washington Bullets / Wizards franchise, and the leader is Elvin Hayes with 15,551 points, 21.3 points per game. He's 14th in points per game, 22nd in points overall. I would say it's either him or Wes Unseld in terms of the best player in franchise history, depending on what you measure. They had their greatest success with them together. They also made a finals with just Unseld and I'm blanking. Black Magic, point guard.
Wait, what's your point?
Earl Monroe.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I wasn't sure you were.
Yes, Earl Monroe. Sorry. Oh, geez. So anyway, getting late for us. And but what's really interesting here to me is that they are the only franchise without a 2000s player in their top 6. And in fact, they don't even have a 90s player in their top 6. And Jeff Malone is the only 80s player in their top 6. He's number 2 from 84 to 1990. So John Wall is 7th on this list. He's going to be shooting up the ranks soon, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But that's really interesting that most of the players who had the great success, that we're talking about the guys in the 60s to 70s, or in the obviously Hayes and Unseld in those years, and Phil Chenier in the 70s years when they were at their peak, ending with the 79th finals loss.
Yeah, it's kind of a interesting franchise in that respect. Yeah, that there isn't anybody that you don't get many people from those different, but I think it speaks, like you said, that they haven't really been great in quite a while. And, it's just an interesting history of the franchise. It's been around for quite a while, but, it doesn't really necessarily have, a super, a ton of great eras. It was like, they have a few little blips here and there, but for the most part, and especially the past few years, it's been better, but it still hasn't been, quite great. And they haven't really been, that, top tier franchise in quite a while. But, active leader though, doing his best to get the Wizards back on track is John Wall, and he'll likely crack the top 4 this season, and he certainly has a chance at the franchise record. He's about 6,132 points behind Hayes, so he could break the record in about 4 seasons if all things go well, which for John Wall I feel like they should. So and he seems pretty committed to that franchise, so I think when it's all said and done, he will be the franchise leader and probably pretty easily be considered one of the best players in that franchise's history. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes over the next few seasons.
Yeah, definitely. I think we talked about him as a contender for the top 3 already, and kind of right up there. Yeah. So the list, I forgot to mention, Jeff Malone was 2nd at 11,000 points, Unseld 3rd at over 10,000. Then Kevin Lockery, Gus Johnson, Phil Chenier, Wall at 7th, and then Walt Bellamy at 8th, and then guys who you might expect to be higher on the list but didn't really play there all that long are Gilbert Arenas at 9th and Anton Jameson at 10th, who both are close to 9,000 points in franchise history. And obviously Arenas, had his knee injuries and then other issues that kind of kept him away from, they did have that return to relevance during the Arenas, Jameson, Butler era, but that unfortunately for them didn't last. But yeah, they're doing pretty well now.
Yeah,
so
things are going better. But a few little fun facts overall of this list of things I was kind of looking looking at, we were kind of talking about overall, the top scorers that we consider undoubtedly the best players. So there were quite a few where we said, maybe, or, he has a case or whatever, but guys that we were like, no doubt, yes, this is the top one. There was only 12 that I counted. And are you kind of surprised by it being as low as it was?
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I guess
the number would be higher again. Like if we counted he probably is. But I was thinking of like guys who were like, nope, boom, he's definitely it.
Okay, yeah, as far as definite, I mean, it's a little more than a third of the league. Yeah, that is a little bit surprising, actually. And I think about it. I mean, I do think of scoring as a I think is the most important thing that you can do. There are very few great players who have, been able to be, incredibly effective without, having the ability to score, at a high volume, at a high efficiency, all that good stuff. That's truly kind of the rare cases where you're not like a Bill Russell, for example, he still scored 15 points per game. So, yeah, that is a little bit surprising. I would have expected to be a little bit more than that, at least, like maybe 20 or so. So the fact that it's only, 12 there. I mean, obviously those guys are, if they're not there, they're fairly close to they're in the top, 3 or 4 generally, or, maybe they didn't have longevity there, but they have a high amount of points per game. But yeah, that is a little bit of a surprise.
And for some other, fun facts here, highest point per game average, among the leading scorers is Wilt, Michael Jordan, Kareem, and the lowest point per game average among the leading scorers, Del Curry, Mike Conley, and David West. So not a huge surprise there. Kind of the early franchises and a little bit more of the charter franchises all in the highest. So just a little fun names there, but pretty fun to kind of, fun little exercise to go ahead and go through all these.
Yeah, I enjoyed this one. This was entertaining. So hopefully people got to learn a few things here. Hopefully we settled some Hornets history issues there. I feel like it's never going to be settled. We're always going to get confused by it. But and people are always going to be like, you shouldn't get confused by it. And then I'm going to be like, I'm sorry, it's confusing. But anyway, Baron Davis gets screwed by the fact that you had to change Hornets history.
Exactly.
So,
we do it for Baron. That's what we do it for Baron. So, I mean, come on.
We're doing it for Baron. Yes. I would do anything for Baron, but I won't do that. Anyway, so we should. What should we do to support the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast?
Oh, there's plenty. You can follow us on Twitter at Over and Back NBA. You can go on Facebook as well, Over and Back NBA. You can find us on iTunes and Google Play and wherever you get your podcasts as well. You just search Over and Back or look up Over and Back NBA. Subscribe to us, and then of course ratings, because that's our sustenance. If you don't rate us, we feel unloved, and we need to be loved, because we have very fragile egos. So make sure you go on there on iTunes or Google Play, wherever you get your podcast from. Make sure you're subscribing. And then, of course, make sure you're giving us a review, because that makes us very, very happy. And also you can see some of our work on the Step Back as well. We're doing some written stuff as well. We should be doing a lot more throughout the season as well. So go to fansided.com, go to the Step Back, the NBA Vertical, and you'll find our written content as well as links to the podcast as well. But of course, Twitter, Facebook, definitely the best places to get at us and discuss stuff. And you have a little fun project going on too that I think people should follow.
Yeah, follow on Twitter NBA 20 years ago, and it's basically just kind of recording what's happening in the NBA 20 years from the date of the tweet. So obviously we're in the midst of the 1997 offseason right now, so we're tweeting about some fun stuff going on during that time, and some good countdowns and some fun video clips, and kind of experimenting with what exactly we're going to do with that. We're also going to be incorporating what was happening 20 years ago into the podcast, so we'll be doing some 1997-98 themed episodes as the season develops, so we'll have some fun with that as well, including that won't be exclusive to what we're doing. We'll also be doing other things as well, but we'll be incorporating that into it, so it should be an enjoyable time. All right, well, thanks everyone for checking us out, and we'll be back again soon.